Hey, we're back. I didn't say this before, but I am an avid UFC boxer person, lady. And so every time I do something like this, I want to go, "We are live," just because like it just feels right. So I didn't say it, but now I'm saying it. But anyways, thank you for being a part of this, Jeff. Welcome back to everybody who's like following along in the series. So I was lucky enough to send Jeff an email and he responded to me about coming and talking to me about the Saints. I living in Texas, I hear things about the Saints, but I often, because of the Cowboys, because of the Texans, I don't see as a lot about them. So I am super excited to hear your perspective, your thoughts about the Saints, and it just, share with us whatever you want to share with us. But I will stop talking and let you introduce yourself. And talk a little bit about the different way you're a fan. I'll just say it that way.
Well, yeah. So, I definitely would classify myself as a Saints fan, but
Okay.
that kind of came about through work. I cover the NFL professionally. So, I grew up in Connecticut, big UConn basketball fan, which has worked out
Nice.
pretty well
Congrats.
for me
Yeah.
last couple of years. I was actually in Texas for the championship game
Oh,
last
cool.
year, the men's championship game. The women have fallen on hard times. They just make it to the Final Four. They don't win every year
Yeah.
anymore.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, they're not that great. They just make it to the Final Four.
Yeah, it's fine. They only win like 35 games a year. And yeah, anyway. But no, so I grew up in Connecticut. I went to college in New Haven. And then I moved to South Carolina for work for 4 years. I want to say, give or take, moved from there down here. So it's actually worked out because the Saints just drafted Spencer Rattler, who went to South Carolina.
Yeah. Okay.
And my wife is from Irmo, South Carolina, or Columbia, South Carolina, and went to Irmo High School, which is, they actually signed a player out of Irmo who
so
grew up
funny.
and went to Irmo High School. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, so I've been down here since 2016, been covering the team full time since 2018.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I mean, I'm the sideline reporter for the local radio station. So that's been very cool. It's been something I think it's kind of a bucket list item for everybody.
I was going to say, who doesn't want to do that?
Right. Just kind of wander around on the sideline during an NFL game. And so that's been a whole lot of fun. It's like, it hardly feels like a job. It's kind of just what I would want to be doing on a Sunday. Anyway, so that's been a really cool way to, because I've been covering the team for a while. So I've been at all the games. I do all that. But being on the sideline and actually kind of being field level with the players has kind of given me an appreciation for, how much, if I was on the field, I would die. Because it really is kind of like a car wreck when you're seeing it close up.
100%. So we talked a little bit before. I'm, a huge Texas fan. Sometimes I will pass. It's like you immediately know you're like, oh, you're the tight end. Okay. Like, yeah. I got it now. It's like, yeah. So we didn't prepare this, but I'm just curious. What is it like going from not being on the sideline and kind of being somebody that sees the team, different angle, different visually, to being up close and personal? Is it easier or is it harder to be that close to really tell your story or to really, I don't know if I'd be able to pay attention because I would be so close.
It's very distracting at times. And, part of my job is not, so like, okay, someone gets hurt. I have to kind of go get information on that. So there are points of the game that you don't see because you're doing other things, or I'm talking on the radio actively and I'm not actively watching what's happening because it's hard to do both things at the same time.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I actually do know a little bit less about what's happening in the game because I don't get the kind of bird's eye view of everything. I'm watching, and they don't show every replay in the stadium. I don't know if you've gone to a lot of games, this, but you watch on TV, you assume that everyone in the stadium has all the information, but they don't. Because they're showing the home team replays. They're showing the replays that are good for the home team, and not like if there's a situation where they don't want the other team to challenge, they're not going to show that replay in the stadium until afterward because they don't want them to see it. So there are a lot of instances where I actually have to go back and rewatch the game, to figure out, what happened in certain moments. It's helpful because as a sideline reporter, I have the real-time feed of the broadcast in my ears.
Oh, well, that's helpful.
Okay. I'm actually keeping up with what's happening in the game because I have like a running dialogue of what's happening in the game. But that helps immensely because I
Yeah,
would actually, when I was in the press box, I would actually do that anyway, but I would be on a delay because the broadcast is on a slight delay.
it is. Yes, yes.
So
So, so when you said that, there's a couple.
really have
So
any idea what's going on.
one thing I'm curious about then. So will you then know if you can hear the broadcast? Because I was going to say sometimes when you're at the games, depending on where your seats are, some random person gets hurt, or I won't call them random, but like let's say a linebacker gets hurt and kind of wobbles off. You might not see that if you are sitting in a certain area or doing a certain thing, and it's like those things actually impact the game. And
Yeah.
it's like these weird things where you're like, yeah, I was at the game, but wait, what happened? I didn't see that. What drive was that? Oh, that's why we didn't run the ball. It's like trying to piece together why the wheels fall off. But so that's cool. Well, thanks for that perspective.
Yeah.
So how is it being a Saints fan right now? What's the energy of the team? I mentioned this before we started. I'm very curious to know what Saints fans are feeling about Derek Carr. How does it feel right now? Just I assume everybody right now is kind of excited about the season because everybody's 0-0 and it is what it is. But what is the general feeling you're getting from where you sit about the team?
Yeah, this is the time of year where everyone's kind of hopelessly optimistic, right? As you get closer and closer to the season, it goes from that to cautiously optimistic. And then by
Yes.
week 5, it's just like it's either like everything is perfect or everything is terrible. There's no middle ground.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, this time of year, people are excited. There's
Good.
interesting storylines. There's draft picks that everyone assumes are going to be great. And then, then a year later, it's like, oh no, why are they terrible? Right. So it's tough. And it's funny because from a fan perspective, you do kind of, ride on the edge of your seat and you kind of overreact and everything's in absolutes. Whereas
Yeah.
my job is kind of I kind of look at my job as kind of a weather vane of like what's fair criticism and what's completely unreasonable criticism. And I
That's
kind of
fair. Yeah, that's
I
fair.
find it to be an important thing to kind of cut through the middle and be like, no, this is reasonable. You are on base with this, but with this, you're
Yeah.
completely just off the wall. And it's this time of year, it's like it's all one or the other, right? You either love
Okay.
something or you hate
That's fair.
something.
Yeah.
But I think Saints fans they're excited about certain things. They're excited about certain players. But you're talking about a fan base that had 15 years of Drew Brees, and a majority of that was, and that was always Sean Payton, right? You had an
Yeah.
extra year of Sean Payton, and it was always going to be tough for whoever succeeded Sean Payton, and it was always going to be tough for whoever succeeded Drew Brees. And the
Mhm.
problem is those two things ended up happening simultaneously. So both of those guys, and Dennis Allen and now Derek Carr, you could say Jameis Winston was the guy initially, but it ended up being Derek Carr. And so they're both being held to these unreasonable standards of what you have to do to be a successful coach or a quarterback. Because like this team went 9-8 last year. They weren't terrible, but based like if you just by talking to people, you would think this team,
Was
they
terrible.
went 4 and
Yeah.
13, and it was like nothing good happened ever. And it's like they won 9 games. It couldn't have been that bad.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
true. That's true.
but it's an
How
important
is Oh, go ahead. I was just going to ask the question I asked before we record. How is the noise in the dome? Like historically, we would always hear about New Orleans and Seattle. I feel like at the time that was all people would talk about. It's so loud, it's so loud, it's so loud. How is the noise now? Is it is it a little quieter or is it still really loud depending on who's in town?
It's still loud.
Okay.
The issue is not that it can't get loud, although I will say, like, they did renovate the stadium, and I don't think it gets quite as loud as it once did because one of the things they did was they opened up the concourses. And like you talk
Oh,
about
yeah.
Seattle, I would say Seattle's way more impressive because Seattle's open air. So there's nothing
Yeah.
bouncing the sound back down. Whereas in the Superdome, one of the reasons it gets so loud is because it's indoors and you're talking about 80,000 people with a roof on the building and it's all reverberating. And I remember during the NFC Championship game in 2018, which is not that long ago. It got so loud and the stadium is shaking so much that a piece of the concourse actually broke off and fell to
Oh
the
gosh,
ground.
that's awesome.
And like that was during the Rams. That was the no call game. If you know all about
Don't
that
even get me
whole thing,
started. Yeah.
it's still a bitter moment. But I remember during that game, like at halftime, Jared Goff had to tape his ear holes shut on his helmet because he couldn't hear the play calls inside his own helmet.
Wow,
Like it was
that's
that loud.
awesome.
It can still get that loud,
Okay.
but the fans need to like have something to get excited about to
Yeah.
cheer. And the defining moments of last year in the Superdome in terms of crowd noise were not how loud it got; it was how loud the boos got, specifically toward Derek Carr. Because there was one game, I think it was against the Lions. So Taysom Hill is on the team, and so there's the Saints have kind of a unique setup where there will be moments where Derek Carr is running the offense, then he'll run off the field, and Taysom will run on the field, and then the next play they'll
The switch.
reverse.
Yeah.
And so it created an opportunity for fans who are not happy about Derek Carr to
Oh
boo him
no.
specifically as he ran off the field. And like it was the opposite. So they would cheer as Taysom Hill ran onto the field,
Right.
and then boo as Derek Carr came back onto the field. And that wasn't everybody, but it was loud enough that it was like, that's a rough look. And
Yeah.
everyone in the stadium knew exactly who was getting booed. Like usually it's kind of like you're booing, but it's this chorus of kind of just indiscriminate, like you don't know who they're just kind of angry. They're not booing anyone specifically. In this case, they were. So, it's funny because late in the season, they beat the Falcons 48-17. They blew them out, and it got loud then. Like it was
But
loud.
okay.
It still gets loud. And I think if this team put together a season that was exciting,
Get
it will
loud
get loud.
again.
But
Yeah.
they've been tough to watch at home. That's been the biggest issue.
I feel like there's just certain core memories in sports. I mean, there's a lot of them in sports. I feel like where you kind of like remember where you were or remember when you
Basketball,
heard
yeah.
it or whatever. And I just remember like for years, and I finally made it. For years, I was like, I have to go to New Orleans to see a football game. I don't care who they play, just because I just wanted to be a part of the experience.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be I just wanted to yell and scream and do whatever I needed to do. And that's fun. It's so fun I love good fan experiences. It's like my favorite thing. So how do you all feel about free agency? Did you all make any like splash moves, big moves? I know Jameis left, and I will be honest, you don't have to comment on this. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to, but um I like the fact that he gave the ball to the guy and let him score a touchdown. so so my opinion matters to no one. I loved it, and I loved the symbolism of him. I feel like he feels like a team guy, and I felt like that was the ultimate sacrifice for another man, and I just appreciated that. So I just wanted the record to show. But how are you all feeling? Because I know Jameis is now gone. But how are you all feeling about some other moves and things that you've made?
No, I mean, I love Jameis. I think he kind of got a raw deal because I think he was Sean Payton's guy, and then he never really got a fair shot when it turned over. And you can't blame Dennis Allen for not, kind of getting a quarterback that he didn't pick and
That's fair.
feeling
Yeah.
like this is a good situation. But it was awkward. And I give Jameis a lot of credit for how he handled it.
Yeah.
It was funny. You say, he kind of fell on the sword there on that last play. That was during that Falcons game we just talked about. It
Yeah.
was funny because they won 48-17. They blew out the Falcons, but the only thing we talked about was that last play.
Yeah.
And it is funny because, if Jameis wanted to stick around, that probably was the nail in the coffin of like, yeah, it's not going to work out.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I understand what he did, and I think it, it definitely was a team
Yeah.
first thing.
Yeah.
And
As a
we'll talk about
human,
that
I feel like
afterwards.
as a human
Yeah.
being, we can all appreciate it and respect it. As a member of a football team, when your coach is saying don't do it, I get it. But listen, I
Well, from a
loved it.
front office perspective of like, hey, are we going to re-sign this guy? It
Facts, gotta let
definitely
him go.
weighs a lot heavier than it did in that moment for like the teammates. Like,
Yeah.
anyway. But from a
Anyways.
free agency perspective, this year for the Saints, it's one of the things that I do appreciate is that they have kind of dialed it back. And we talked about
Good.
the Drew Brees era. It's over, and everyone needs to appreciate, hey, it's over.
Right.
You can't operate as if this is the last 3 years of the Drew Brees era every year where you're kind of throwing caution to the wind from a salary cap perspective. You're bringing guys in, you're going for win now stuff. Whereas like, this is not a win now team. It's a team that maybe gets hot, wins a lot of games, but it's not a team you go into it saying, we got to win one for this guy. Like, no, you got to build a roster. And so this year, more so than I can remember since I've been covering the team, which again has been since 2017, give or take. They didn't really sign anyone notable, right? They brought in kind of low end free agents. They swam in the shallow end of the pool is the way I would put it. But again, I think that's a good thing. because I
Yeah,
think
I like it. I like it. I'm
so
old school when it comes to building football teams in
yeah,
some regards. Like big splash doesn't mean much of anything. If I can go get a well, do you watch college football? It's kind of like the old argument of do you want 2 5 stars or 10 3 stars or
right.
whatever number you want to use. Give me those 3 stars because I don't want to deal with the 5 star. I'll take them. Don't get me wrong, but like I don't mind, some of
Well,
these three
now the
stars.
5 star is gonna cost you more than it'll
Exactly.
cost you to sign a free agent in the NFL, so I don't know.
Exactly. Give me those 3 stars, man. Load me up. So,
Yeah.
well, that's cool. So what about the draft? How do you feel like you all did in the draft? Was there anybody that you picked or that y'all picked that you were kind of like, "Oh, okay, that was interesting," or how do you feel like, y'all did? Do you have a favorite pick? I
Well,
don't know if
so,
you can say that or
I
not,
cover
but
the team, we have 2 podcasts, so I put out mock drafts every year, so anytime they pick the first round pick that I had in my mock draft, I feel like that's a win for me.
yeah,
So that happened this year. It's actually happened 3 years in a row. I've guessed their pick 3 years in a row. So, the first round pick was the Oregon State offensive tackle. His name is Taliesin Fuanga, which is a
great
fun
pick.
name to
Yeah.
say. I like that pick. It wouldn't be I think probably my favorite pick is the quarterback because they didn't trade up. Saints almost always trade up. They didn't trade up. They sat in the 5th round, and then they ended up taking Spencer Rattler out of South Carolina, who I talked about earlier, who probably should have been second, third round pick.
I was
And
surprised he wasn't.
yeah, well, I think it's 2 things. It's one, like there was some character issues, which because he was in a Netflix series way back when, which is so silly. Like,
Are you kidding me?
yeah,
Like, I would have
it's
character issues too if everybody saw what I did
right.
back
I'm
then.
thankful that I was not the subject of a Netflix series. It would have been boring as hell for one thing, and second, it was like I don't want to have to watch that back
Yeah.
5 years down the road after a job interview. But yeah, so that's one thing. And then if you watch the draft, there was 6 quarterbacks that got drafted in the top 12 picks,
Which was weird.
it was crazy. And the last one was Bo Nix, who went to Sean Payton and the Broncos. And there was, a lot of reporting done, and it kind of indicated, hey, so people were high on Spencer Rattler in the draft, but all the
Sure.
teams that might have taken him on day 2 took a quarterback on day 1, right? Like the Broncos were high on Spencer Rattler. I don't think the grade between Bo Nix and Spencer Rattler was, 4 rounds different.
Right.
But you already drafted Bo Nix, so you're not going to go
Mhm.
draft a quarterback in the second or
Good
third
point.
round, and you continue on that line. And there was a handful of teams that probably were in the same boat, and so you get to a point where it's like, okay, fine. Well, why are we taking a quarterback here? We didn't take him in the second or third round, because that's something you'll see once you pass on a quarterback 2 or 3 times. Why are you taking him that 4th time? Well, the Saints didn't really have a pick to pass on him with. I think they probably would have taken him in the 3rd or 4th round, but
That
they
makes
just kind of
sense.
held steady. And that's why I like the pick, because picking him in the 5th round, it's such a low pressure situation.
Mhm.
Whereas if you spend a second round pick on a guy, that's just you're going to be constantly being pressured to push him forward a little further, try to develop him faster. And I think this is just a good situation for him to just kind of learn and sit there and
Yeah.
become a quarterback, which doesn't really happen that often in the NFL.
Doesn't happen. I mean, as a Steelers fan, that's kind of, the whole Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, like that's what we hope happens in Pittsburgh is when Justin's ready, he's ready because he's learned and gotten to take a deep breath.
Yeah,
And hopefully has an offensive line that can actually block for him so he's not running for his life as soon as the ball's hiked because bless his
that's
heart.
helpful.
Yeah, so that's helpful too. What was Derek Carr's contract? How many more years does he have? Do you remember?
It's
I could have.
kind of it's funny because the way the Saints operate, they restructure every contract
Oh, okay. It's
basically
one of
every
those.
year.
Okay,
So
fair.
it's a little complicated in the sense of like he signed a 4-year deal initially, but it was kind of a 2-year deal guaranteed, and then you kind of push it out after that. They
Gotcha.
restructured it after this past season. So, from a commitment perspective, which is really when you talk about NFL contracts, it's like, okay, how much
All
money
that
is
matters is
guaranteed and up
commitment.
to which
Yep.
point is it guaranteed?
Yep.
Because you can have a 12-year contract if only the first 3 years are guaranteed. It's really a 3-year contract.
Yeah.
Um, so they restructured it this year. So I think you're talking 2 more years with Derek as the quarterback, which is a good length of time if your goal is to develop a quarterback behind him,
Yeah.
so that when you get into that point where you can either extend him or move on, you can make a decision based on the guy developing. So I think you're talking about a 3-year commitment right now.
Okay.
But yeah, the Saints are obnoxious with the salary cap and their restructures.
They
I mean,
are. Didn't they do that weird
they do a good
Taysom
job.
Hill thing? Didn't they do a Taysom Hill like? I don't know. I just kind of I don't remember exactly what it was, but I felt like it was like a weird contract where people are like, "Wait, what? How much is he getting paid?" And it was like everybody was so confused because it was like some wasn't he getting like I don't remember. I don't remember what
Yeah,
it was. It was
it's
weird.
he has signed a couple interesting contracts. One was a contract that was basically loaded with incentives for if he became the starting quarterback, he would get paid more. And a lot of times you'll see players put that in their contracts because if you're getting signed as a tight end, your
Right.
contract value should be around this much. But if you're a quarterback, your contract value should be way higher.
Right.
So they never intended on making him the starting quarterback, but they worked that into his deal to kind of be like, well, okay, here you go. If this
Just in
happens,
case.
great.
Yeah,
So
you're
that
right.
was one thing, and that kind of got confusing because every time someone sees a big number, they're only going to share the big number as opposed to
Of
like, well,
course.
he's only going to earn half of this because he's not going to be the starting quarterback. So that was one thing. And then, yeah, he probably is overpaid relative to his position, but a lot of it is non-guaranteed money on the back end that just kind of gets restructured and gets pushed out over 5 years to
Yeah.
make it work for the salary
Well,
cap.
what is
Again,
his
it's
position
complicated.
though? And what is his position? I think that's complicated too. I
I
mean,
agree.
what so he kind of is getting paid and doing what he's supposed to do because if you can't tell me what position he plays, then you can't tell me how he should be paid. He just is getting paid. He's on the Saints and we move on. It's just kind of like a weird thing where, he's an anomaly in that sense and I love that. That's awesome.
He plays the
Um
Taysom Hill position.
there you go. So what are your concerns heading into the season? I know you mentioned that you guys aren't like you're not pounding the sand every article or you're posting that says Super Bowl 2024. But what are some of your concerns that you have just heading into the training camp really? It's not training camp right now, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Some rookie mini camp is coming up this weekend. So we'll be out there on Saturday. And then it's like OTAs, mandatory mini camp, full training camp, which the training camp this year is in Irvine, California, which I'm excited about.
Really?
Yeah. They're
Huh.
doing renovations at the facility here.
Oh darn.
So they had to
Darn.
find another location. Right. And it's like, oh, you mean we get to go to, Southern California in July? Sure. Yeah, don't twist my arm or anything.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, so if this team has concerns, it's going to be okay. Is Derek Carr the guy? Can he kind of prove that the second half of last season was what you should expect versus the first half of last season, which was very underwhelming, and he was hurt. And so, like, if the reality is the first half of last season, then that's a major concern, and you're not
Yeah,
going to go very
sure.
far unless you have a quarterback in the NFL. But the biggest concern is probably the offensive line because you could argue that they don't have a single piece of the left side of the offensive line in place because the guy they drafted 2 years ago, he got benched last year, but he's probably going to be the starter again. So if he continues to be a turnstile, it's a problem. And then they don't really have a starting left guard right now. Like I couldn't even tell you who it is. There's options, but like I don't know who's gonna like. It's never good when you don't even have the top end of the depth chart where like
Fair.
yeah, the guy behind him can beat him out, but at this point you just have a bunch of like twos and threes, and someone's gonna have to be the one. Yeah, so that's the concern is the offensive
Okay.
line is in shambles and Derek Carr can't really run around. He gets hurt again. That's the biggest concern in my opinion. I
Yeah.
think the defense is going to be solid. I think they have pass catchers. Alvin Kamara is still good, even though he's getting a little older. But if the offensive line isn't there, then
Yeah.
what do you have?
I had to watch a team this year with offensive line woes. So I know all about it. Well, I don't want to know anything else about it ever again. It's brutal. So what about scheduling? So obviously in NFC South, um, I don't know. Look, I feel like a lot of the teams though in the NFC South right now are kind of in the same phase of like building, developing. The Panthers are in that division. The Bucks probably might be the most stable. I think. I don't know. But how are you feeling about the NFC South and your schedule this year?
Um, yeah, so a lot of people are excited about the Falcons and Kirk Cousins, and I do think it's funny because the Falcons are basically getting the same treatment the Saints got last year. They signed the top free agent quarterback, and everyone's like, "They're going to win the South. It's going to be so easy. Everyone else is terrible." But then they struggled at points. They finished 9-8, but because of
Yeah.
the the hype in the preseason and like the fact they had an easy schedule, it was like, oh, 9-8 is the biggest failure and you could ever imagine. Whereas the Bucks, who everyone went into that season with no expectations, also finished 9-8, won a tiebreaker, and they had a great season, right?
Yeah,
So I don't know. And I
it's
think that's
true.
where the Falcons are right now. Everyone's excited about the Falcons, and what's going to happen when it's not all sunshine and rainbows in week 5. And that's kind of what I'm looking at. I think the Saints are in a position where they can, they're in a very high leverage season, right? Because while 9-8 isn't the end of the world, it's like, okay, it's kind of the fulcrum point where it's either you get better or you get worse,
Mm-hmm.
right? If your
Mm-hmm.
record improves and you make the playoffs and you feel like you took a step forward, then you're in great shape. And you can look around the division and say, hey, we can compete with these guys. If
Yeah.
you fall down and you go 8-9, 7-10, and you kind of revert, then I think you start to see firings. I think maybe you find a different head coach. That probably is the end of the Derek Carr era if that happens, because Dennis Allen and Derek Carr are kind of a package deal, in my opinion.
Okay.
So I know it's tough. I'd like to think that they can take that step forward and kind of pick up where they left off at the end of last season. They got a new offensive coordinator. But it's really tough. I've learned not to assume I know what's going to happen, because
Yeah,
the
you
NFL
don't.
is weird. It's such thin margins that it can change on a dime
It's
so easily.
it's weird, and it's a business, and sometimes those two things don't mix well, depending on what side of it you're on. And scary. The scary thing about the NFL, I always say, is you're always kind of one major injury away from really just not knowing. Because I think about the Bengals and Joe Burrow. If Joe
Right.
Burrow goes down, it's like, uh-oh,
It changes
I don't
everything.
know.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know what we're doing here. And so it's an interesting league too, because it's not college. You don't have all these other options and all these other guys and the next 5-star to come in. That's not how this works. This is what you got is what you got. Good luck. Well, awesome. So my last question is just open-ended. Anything else that we should be paying attention to as we look at the Saints, or anything that is being talked about that maybe we haven't heard because, we don't get all the latest Saints report? I feel like I hear about the Cowboys. I don't even care about them, but I just feel like I always hear about them. They always find a way to let me know what dumb thing they have going on. It's so weird. So I don't know if there's anything happening. What do you guys? What's your hashtag? Is it still, what is y'all's hashtag? Is it
The
still, do y'all
Saints
still,
hashtag?
yeah. Do y'all still say,
It's just
go ahead.
hashtag Saints.
It's just, oh,
And it actually gives you the fleur de lis, which is nice.
okay. I thought y'all had like a saying, like a different saying. So, okay.
Well, I mean, who
So
dat? I'm sure you could get away with who dat, but that's like the official team hashtag is just
it's just
hashtag Saints,
Saints.
which is
Okay.
funny because occasionally the Pope is tweeting about Saints, and he just does hashtag Saints because why wouldn't you? You're the Pope. You can do whatever you want. But then the Saints logo is like a tag. You know how sometimes
Yeah.
you tweet and it has the
Yep.
like that's so the Saints fleur de lis pops up. So the
That's
joke is that the
awesome.
Pope is a Saints fan, which hey, maybe he is. I mean, I don't know why. If you had to pick a team out of Italy, why wouldn't you go with the Saints team if you're the Pope? But either way, that's yeah.
Valid. That's a fair argument. You know what? I'll go with you on that. I'll go with you on that. Is there anything happening? Like if I followed the Saints hashtag, is there anything that people are talking about, or is it just kind of like a wait and see type of situation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is the time of year where it's very slow.
Cool.
Not a ton happens, so it's like, and you didn't draft a hot quarterback high. You drafted an offensive lineman, so it doesn't get people's juices flowing,
It's
right?
not sexy.
Uh,
Yeah, it's just like, eh.
but this season's going to be interesting because the Saints have 2 games, and we'll find out the schedule next week. It's coming out on the 15th. We should know by now, but whatever. The NFL's doing their own thing. The Saints this year, they host the Broncos and they host the Raiders. And
Oh, so Sean
so
Payton
yes,
and Derek Carr's
so,
former team?
yeah. So Sean Payton's going to show up and face the Saints in the Superdome for the first time, and the Raiders are going to show up and face Derek Carr, and Derek Carr is going to face the Raiders for the first time. So it's
Nice.
going to be a narrative this year, the revenge narrative, and
Yeah.
if it goes well, like it's one of those situations where like this season can go one of 2 ways, right? If Sean Payton walks into the Superdome and his team just annihilates the Saints, right, and Bo Nix goes nuts, I think
Yeah.
that's enough to get your coach fired on its own. Like,
Yeah, it's kind of
so
like a college rival. When that
yeah,
person walks into town and demolishes your team,
it
you're
means
like,
a lot more.
yeah,
Yeah, the feeling lasts a lot longer. So I
yeah.
don't know
What
if
about what about the Raiders? Do you think Derek Carr should be worried
no,
if he doesn't play
it's
well
a
against the
little
Raiders?
different. I mean, yeah, I mean, if you come in, if the
Yeah,
Raiders show up and blow out the Saints, then that's a problem
yeah.
because the Raiders aren't good. But at the same time, it's like it's not as personal. It doesn't feel. It's probably personal for Derek,
I
but it's not
see.
as
Yeah,
personal
yeah.
for like the fan base who's still mad. I think there's resentment there. Because why wouldn't there be? The guy just was like, yeah, peace.
He was
Like,
done. He didn't want to do
I
it. Yeah,
didn't
that's
realize
true.
not having Drew was going to be so difficult, so I'm gonna go away.
Just didn't want to do
And
it. Yeah, he literally just didn't want to do it. And then
but he did want to
the,
be a coach because he was only gone for a year.
I was just gonna say that. You say you didn't want to do it, you were tired, you're over it, you need a break, and then you go back and then you coach the Broncos. And so, anyways,
He
listen,
said
I hope
it's like he said it's not you, it's me, but then immediately was like, just kidding, it was you. Right.
right, right. And just tell us that. Like
Right.
the sports world where it's like I always say there's a huge intersectionality between politics and sports that we don't talk about enough, in my personal opinion. That is the perfect definition of he could have just said, it's time for me to leave. I need to go somewhere else. Nobody would have liked it any better than how they liked what he did, but at least you're being real with us. Like, at least we know.
Well,
But
see,
here we
I
go.
kind of put it more like it's the intersectionality of politics, sports, and your wallet. Because one of the reasons he couldn't say that was because he's under contract and he needed the
Oh, I
team to be
didn't
like,
know he was under contract.
yeah, he walked away from a good bit of money, but at the same time, like there's a difference between leaving your job because you're retiring and leaving your job to go for another job, which because that's breach, right? Like he would end up owing the team a
Yeah.
lot of money if he broke that contract as
Oh.
opposed to retiring, which then after a year, and they already got a new coach, they traded him to the Broncos. So they were able to get something out of it, which is why the Saints were like, fine, whatever. But
Oh, and I didn't even realize that. And I guess I just didn't see the trade. So what did they give him a draft pick? What did they
yeah, they
trade?
actually it was a solid deal. They got a first round pick last year. The Broncos traded a first round pick to the Saints, and then the Saints traded this year's third for the Broncos second. So like the
Oh, that's
Brian
cool.
Brzee,
Okay.
who was their first round pick, because the Saints didn't have a first round pick last year. They made the Broncos pick, and that was Brian Brzee, who had a really good rookie season. And then Kool-Aid McKinstry, who's the cornerback out of Alabama, was the guy
There.
they picked with the Broncos pick in the second round. So they
Nice.
they
Okay.
they get made out
I
decently well in terms of like if
yeah.
he had just quit, they would have just not had him. So it worked out in their favor to some extent. But
Yeah, but still, now I see what you're saying. I didn't I guess I missed that big piece that he was under
yeah,
contract.
for
So
like 4 more years.
yeah, wow. Okay, well, thanks for telling me that. I had no idea. And yeah, that does, you know what? I'm not surprised though. That's how the game goes. That's why I like the NFL. It's like everything I don't love about life, for some reason I love it in the NFL. I don't like cutthroat. I don't like all the time business decisions. I don't like
Right.
things that take out the people element of life, but the NFL takes out the people element more times than they don't. And I love it. So I don't know. Maybe I'm a psycho. I don't know. But anyways, I appreciate this conversation. I don't know if you want to let people know where they can find you. Where they can listen to your voice, because you know how it goes. Like once you hear somebody's voice and then you can actually like continue to hear that person's voice, it's kind of cool because you're like, hey, I know this guy. Where can they find you so that they can see more of your work and hear your takes as the season gets closer?
For sure. Yeah. I'm on Twitter. I still call it Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You see my name there. It's NOWAK. And I work for WWL full time. I'm the Saints reporter. So it's WWL in New Orleans. It's, you can find it on the Audacy app, which is a decent little app. You can
Yeah.
go look it up. I also host a podcast called Inside Black and Gold. If you search for it, it's on YouTube and podcasts wherever you get them. So that
Nice.
would be a good start.
Well, I appreciate you, Jeff. Thanks for talking to me, and thanks
Sure.
for graciously accepting my email and knowing that I was a person. I like to say that because I don't think we give people enough credit for being good humans anymore. So I just appreciate you being you, responding, and just, coming and chatting with me about the Saints. Like, what's better than that?
For sure. Yeah. Happy to do it.
Cool. Awesome.